This crime literally shocked two nations and united them in despair. The suspect in this case, who skyrocketed to the top of Japan's most wanted list, disfigures his own face to hide his true identity from the world. Today, we'll delve into the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi and his victim, Lindsay Hawker. This crime is filled with bizarre and somewhat disturbing details, including plastic surgery and the use of a flower pot to evade detection. The entirety of Japan's police force would hunt him down, and it would take years to capture him. Although today's story takes place in Japan, we begin deep in the heart of England, in a small town called Coventry, known for its medieval cathedral, and, unfortunately, the devastation it suffered during World War II. Over the decades, Coventry has rebuilt itself and become an important hub in the UK, offering easy access to London and Birmingham, as well as most of the country within a 2-hour drive. This strategically located town has much to offer its residents, and one of them was Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay was born on December 30, 1984, to Bill and Julia Hawker. As a child, she was a happy and cheerful girl. She also had two sisters named Louise and Lisa. She attended King Henry VIII School and decided to pursue university education after completing college. Lindsay excelled academically, graduating with first-class honors in 2006. She was very focused on her future career and popular among her friends. Lindsay led an interesting life. She was talented, caring, and successful, but it wasn't enough for her. She decided to try something new before pursuing her master's degree. So, in mid-2006, she made a plan to take a gap year. She believed that a year off from studying would give her a fresh perspective on life and help her see it from a different angle. In October 2006, she enrolled in a language school called Nova and flew to the land of the rising sun. Nova was one of the largest private language schools in Japan, recruiting adults from around the world to teach English both in Osaka and Tokyo. Nova was considered a prestigious institution, and Lindsay was one of the lucky few to secure a position as a teacher. In Tokyo, Lindsay was placed near Koenji, one of Tokyo's train stations. She quickly settled into her new surroundings, just a 30-minute walk from the city's main attractions. Koenji offered plenty of entertainment options, including food parks, shopping centers, temples, and good bars. Tokyo had everything one could ask for. She found herself in one of the most fascinating cities in the world and was enchanted by it. Later, Lindsay decided to move a little further from central Tokyo to a place called Chiba. Rent was cheaper there, and it wasn't her decision alone. She moved with two other teachers who also worked at another school, and the three quickly became friends. After the move, Lindsay's time in Tokyo flew by. While she enjoyed her adventure, Lindsay still often thought of home. Back in England, she had a loving family, many friends, and a boyfriend. She kept in touch with them through Facebook, Skype, or simple phone calls. 6 months after Lindsay arrived in Tokyo, it was now March 2007, and she had an unusual encounter. She had finished work and returned to Chiba Station during the day. As she picked up her bicycle, a man approached her from behind. She turned, and the man greeted her, saying he knew she was an English teacher. Lindsay was puzzled by the situation. She was sure he wasn't one of her students. She didn't respond and walked away, but the man continued following her. Lindsay hopped on her bike and pedaled away from him, but the man still pursued her, quickening his pace and eventually breaking into a run. With the numerous small streets and crossing pathways, it was almost impossible for Lindsay to lose him. He continued running after her, trying to start a conversation. He asked where she was from and where she studied, but Lindsay kept trying to escape. Eventually, she arrived at her apartment, where she left her bike. The man, known as Tatsuya Ichihashi, had chased her all the way to her home. When he finally caught up, he asked for a favor. Despite his strange behavior, his request was simple and seemingly innocent. Tatsuya asked Lindsay if she could tutor him in English, saying he needed a little help with the language. He suggested meeting at a cafe and promised generous hourly pay. Lindsay politely declined, citing her busy work schedule and the little free time she had for herself. Tatsuya seemed disappointed but appeared to accept her response. Then, he asked her another strange question. Out of breath from chasing Lindsay through Chiba's streets, he politely asked if he could come in for just a moment to have a glass of water. Lindsay hesitated but reluctantly let him into her apartment. Although she was sure he was odd and had made her nervous, she wasn't alone at home. Her two roommates were there. She decided it was a good opportunity to show this man that she wasn't alone in this country and had some protection. It was also a chance to show his face to her friends in case he ever showed up again. They entered the apartment together, and while he poured himself a glass of water, Tatsuya made the offer again, significantly increasing the payment. This time, he offered Lindsay 3,500 yen, about $32 per hour, with the condition that their interaction would remain strictly professional. It was an offer Lindsay couldn't refuse. Although her new school provided for her basic living expenses in Tokyo, this would be a small additional income. Plus, it seemed like easy money. She agreed to his request and arranged to meet him at a cafe in a few days. Tatsuya was grateful and thanked Lindsay for agreeing. But before he left her apartment, he did something else. He pulled a pen from his back pocket, took a piece of paper, and began sketching something. Within seconds, he handed her a note. It was a quick sketch of Lindsay, along with his name and phone number. Tatsuya Ichihashi was a 28-year-old man from the city of Ichikawa, also in Chiba Prefecture. He was born in Gifu Prefecture on January 5, 1979, grew up there, and later moved to Chiba. He was raised in a wealthy family. His father was a doctor at a local hospital in Chiba, and his mother was a licensed dentist. In his youth, Tatsuya had ambitions of following in his father's footsteps and becoming a doctor, but he failed his exams and was denied further studies. However, he settled for earning a degree in horticulture. He graduated from Chiba University in 2005, and while his results were relatively good, Tatsuya made no effort to find a job. Instead, he lived off an allowance from his parents of 100,000 yen, about $900 per month. At this point, we learn a little about the darker side of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Although he had no criminal record, he had been accused of theft and assault. Allegedly, he had attacked a girl on the street and tried to rob her. The matter was settled out of court. It's claimed that his father paid the girl around 1 million yen, about $10,000. Tatsuya was also described as a loner obsessed with physical fitness. He regularly attended a local gym and often cycled over 25 kilometers a day. Additionally, Tatsuya was known as a recluse who had no intention of seeking a job. With his $900 allowance, paying $35 per hour for weekly lessons was affordable for him. Returning to Lindsay's apartment, after handing her the sketch with his name and number, Tatsuya thanked her for her time and the glass of water, wished her well, and left. Fast forward a few days, it was Saturday, March 24, 2007. Lindsay contacted Tatsuya, and they arranged their first English lesson at a local cafe. Security cameras captured the two of them talking while standing in line for drinks. Lindsay appeared relatively relaxed, but she kept stepping back whenever Tatsuya got too close. It's believed the pair sat and talked for a little over an hour, with the lesson going as planned. At the end of the lesson, Tatsuya told Lindsay that he had forgotten his money. "Don't worry," Tatsuya said. "I live less than a kilometer from here. Why don't you stop by and collect the money before heading off?" Tatsuya suggested. Lindsay agreed, and they hailed a taxi. She didn't bring her bike that day, and she also had work scheduled for later in the afternoon. When they arrived at Tatsuya's apartment, she asked the taxi driver to wait for her briefly. He agreed, and Lindsay followed Tatsuya into his apartment. Minutes passed, and Lindsay didn't return. The taxi driver thought this was odd but didn't pay much attention to it. Maybe her plans had changed? The driver left, not waiting any longer, and quickly forgot about the incident. However, later that day, Lindsay failed to show up for work. What's worse, she didn't return to her apartment either. Her housemates, already noticing her absence and the fact she hadn't been at work, began to worry. Later that night, they called the police to report her missing. But Saturday turned into Sunday, and Sunday into Monday. Lindsay's family and friends back home in the UK were starting to grow concerned as she hadn't contacted them in a while. True panic set in on Tuesday when she missed her second day of work. The school contacted her parents to report that Lindsay had missed 2 days of work. Immediately after, her parents contacted the police. Lindsay's friends shared that she went to a cafe with a man shortly before her disappearance. That man also left the sketch in her apartment, which became the first clue. It was around 6 p.m. when 2 officers arrived at Tatsuya's residence. However, after knocking on the door, there was no response. But his neighbors were home and kindly allowed the officers to look into Tatsuya's living room from their balcony. The lights were off, but it appeared that someone inside was hiding. Strangely enough, the bathtub had been moved out onto the balcony. The police clearly became suspicious and called for backup. Concerned that Lindsay might be held hostage inside, 7 more officers arrived within an hour. 3 hours after the first officers had arrived, 9 of them were ready to storm Tatsuya's home and conduct a search. But just then, to everyone's surprise, Tatsuya suddenly opened the door. In the moment of confusion, he bolted past the officers. They tried grabbing his backpack, but the straps tore off, allowing him to escape. The officers couldn't catch him, as the building's hallways were narrow and maze-like, giving him the chance to flee. Adding to the problem was that the officers' radios weren't synced for communication. And so, in the middle of the Tokyo night, Tatsuya Ichihashi simply vanished. Later, the police searched his apartment, uncovering a horrifying scene. They found the naked body of Lindsay Hawker. She had been buried in the very bathtub that Tatsuya had placed on the balcony. The tub was filled with a mixture of sand and soil, almost completely covering Lindsay's body, with only her right hand slightly sticking out of the surface. She had been bound with plastic ties, and a gag was in her mouth. There were scars and bruises on the upper part of her body. In her final hours, she had endured prolonged violence. Her belongings were scattered all over the apartment. To make matters worse, along with the sand and soil, Tatsuya had added chemicals to the tub to speed up decomposition. On top of that, he had scattered flower seeds over it to disguise the bathtub as a planter. These seeds ended up feeding on Lindsay's body. Adding to the gruesome discovery, it was found that Tatsuya had shaved all of Lindsay's hair off. The police also found several wigs in his apartment, leading them to believe that he might have disguised himself as a woman. This case quickly caught public attention, and soon rumors began to spread that Tatsuya might have killed Lindsay to use her hair for wigs. The next morning, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially declared wanted across Japan. The police quickly distributed wanted posters throughout the city, and his face was shown on numerous news websites. Authorities questioned anyone who might have any potential information. Police raids were also conducted in places where Tatsuya might be hiding. Despite all these efforts, Tatsuya seemed to have vanished like a ghost. In the following weeks, there were almost no credible sightings of the man, and the ones reported led investigators to dead ends. The police were so desperate to catch him that they released photoshopped images of Tatsuya in various wigs, in case he was wearing disguises. But Tatsuya remained unnoticed, skillfully evading capture. His escape turned into weeks, then months, and eventually years. Needless to say, this deeply upset Lindsay's family. Beyond the horrifying pain of losing their daughter, there was a sense that the killer had slipped away. Adding to their frustration was the belief that Japanese police had grown lazy and dismissive as time passed. This angered Lindsay's parents so much that, a few months after her death, they traveled to Japan to learn more about their daughter's killer. Lindsay's father, Bill, even did something extraordinary. He went to a bar for a meeting with members of the Japanese Yakuza Mafia. Before asking for their help, he presented them with 2 bottles of whiskey as gifts. Meanwhile, the Japanese police faced intense scrutiny. How had a group of 9 officers failed to catch a single suspect? Why did it take months to interview witnesses? And why was the wanted poster of Tatsuya using a photo that was 7 years old? Gradually, tensions between Lindsay's family and the police escalated. Soon, both British and Japanese media became involved. And while all this was happening, Tatsuya was still at large. In fact, he had been traveling across much of Japan while on the run. From Aomori, one of Japan's northernmost cities, to the southern island of Okinawa, Tatsuya kept hiding and remained undetected. He even lived on a remote island in a concrete bunker to avoid being found. By 2008, a year after Lindsay's death, and well into 2009, Tatsuya was living in Osaka. Situated not far from Tokyo, Osaka is a major city and commercial hub on Honshu, the largest island in the Japanese archipelago. Osaka is famous for its modern architecture, vibrant nightlife, and incredibly delicious street food. During this time, Tatsuya usually lived in internet cafes and worked construction jobs to survive. With all the money he saved, he underwent plastic surgery to alter his appearance and avoid capture. However, he had already been altering his looks using crude methods since the moment he was declared wanted. He cut off his moles and part of his lower lip with scissors. Eventually, he even threaded a needle through his nose to change its shape. By the summer of 2009, the police had grown desperate to find Tatsuya. That's when the National Police Agency decided to increase the reward for information on Tatsuya from 1 million to 10 million yen. They also announced that Tatsuya might have undergone facial plastic surgery, meaning he could look different. They urged people to stay vigilant and look for any distinguishing features of the fugitive. And this approach worked. In October 2009, a plastic surgeon from Nagoya informed the police that he believed he had just worked on Tatsuya. Foolishly, Tatsuya had agreed to have, before and after, photos taken of his surgery. These photos were sent to the police and soon made their way to the public. Tatsuya panicked. He realized the recently published photos had completely destroyed his seemingly perfect disguise. Little did he know how successful the police's move had been. A construction worker at his Osaka job site recognized him and informed the police. Tatsuya knew he had to flee Osaka, and fast. His plan was the same as before. He intended to head to Okinawa and hide in one of the abandoned concrete bunkers scattered across its remote islands. On November 10, 2009, he secretly made his way to the Osaka ferry terminal. It turned out that a ferry to Okinawa was leaving in 3 days, and all Tatsuya needed to do was lay low and wait. It seemed he would soon be far from justice again, but before he could board the ferry, Tatsuya's luck finally ran out. A dock worker recognized his face and alerted security, saying it might be Ichihashi. And he was right, because moments later, Tatsuya found himself face to face with a group of officers. They asked him his name, and at that moment, Tatsuya knew the game was over. He was officially arrested by the police, initially charged only with failing to report Lindsay's death. He was later charged with her rape and murder. It would take 8 long months before he finally stood trial. On July 4, 2011, Tatsuya's court case began, and the outcome was clear from the start. The trial didn't take long to discuss the details. Most of the focus was on what punishment Tatsuya would receive. Japan does apply the death penalty, but only in the most extreme cases. However, Tatsuya was a widely publicized criminal in the media, and most people supported sentencing him to death. During the trial, Tatsuya admitted to luring Lindsay into his apartment, raping her, and then strangling her because he feared his neighbors would hear her screaming and call the police. On July 21, 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Lindsay Hawker. Although Lindsay's family had demanded the death penalty, The court deemed it inappropriate since Tatsuya had no prior criminal record. At 32 years old, there was still a chance he could rehabilitate. The trial would not have happened without Lindsay's parents. They had to not only relive those events but also see previously unpublished photos of Lindsay's body. It's something no parent should ever have to endure. After Tatsuya's sentencing, the Hawkers said the following: "We have waited a long time for this day. We have waited for justice for 4.5 years. Ichihashi, you took a precious life, destroyed everything for us, and stole countless memories." The life sentence for Tatsuya was welcomed by most people in the country, and even Tatsuya himself accepted his fate. Shortly before the trial, Tatsuya wrote and published a book in which he confessed to Lindsay's murder. It was his autobiography, describing how he spent 2.5 years on the run, and what he did to avoid being caught. Over 100,000 copies were sold worldwide. All the profits and royalties from the book, titled "Until I Was Arrested," were offered to Lindsay's family. But her family declined the offer. Despite Tatsuya's strange attempt to do a good deed, nothing could bring back their daughter. Lindsay was beloved, successful, and irreplaceable. She was gaining incredible experiences abroad, spreading kindness by teaching others a valuable skill. Ultimately, that kindness was used against her by a strange and heartless man. Her parents, sisters, and friends miss her every